D'Angelo Russell makes his Nets debut again in a loss to the Raptors. Is the tank safe? What's going to be the future of D'Lo on this team? What to expect in the next few weeks and months for the Brooklyn Nets? We're going to get into all that. But first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Doug Norrie, at the owner-operator, DFSR.com. If you need projections for FanDuel, DraftKings, over there on DFS stuff, NBA, NFL, stumbling through it because I'm, used to Adam saying all this stuff on a day-to-day basis. Going over to DFSR.com. No aforementioned Adam Armbrecht on the show today as we ring in the new year. Hopefully, it's a happy new year to everyone in Nets Nation, tanking or no. Going to be an uplifting 2025. The losses, let's not get too wrapped up in the wins and losses. Let's just make it a good year out of the gate. Not a great year to start here for the Brooklyn Nets. If you were on the win side, a good year if you're on the tanking side of things, with the Nets losing to the Toronto Raptors 130-113 on Wednesday night. The debut of D'Angelo Russell, debut times two of D'Lo, right? Second time around in the D'Lo era for the Brooklyn Nets. We'll get into that, but overall, they lose by 17 in a game that gets away from them late. We'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff we saw in this game. Ultimately, though, if you're following along with this on a game-to-game basis and wanting to see the Nets, sort of rack up the losses to find their way back into the lottery standings. They're 12-21 on the season right now, 6 wins ahead of the Wizards there in the East, 7 wins ahead of the full tanking Pelicans, where it's a total mess over in New Orleans. So if you're thinking that's the way your mind is set, and I get it why it is, and I also get why if you want to be on the win side of it, sports are a tricky thing. This game was good for the folks that want to move down in the standings to move up in the lottery standings overall for the Nets. We'll get into a little bit more, like I said, what we saw from this game. But the start. I'll talk about D'Angelo Russell here, back with the Brooklyn Nets after the first run that, was arguably still his best season since he joined the NBA. When he was on the Nets at the end of the 2017-2018 season, and then it was when he turned into an all-star in the 18-19 season, which kind of was his, I would consider that to be a breakout year, right? 21 points in that season, shoots 37% from three, but ultimately leads the Nets into the playoffs, is an all-star, and kind of just propels him into this next level sort of NBA discussion. And then from there, it's been sort of a tricky conversation around D'Lo in his time with the Warriors for a year, and then 3.5 seasons with the Timberwolves, and then the run with the Lakers, where ultimately he's traded for Dorian Finney-Smith and a bunch of third-round picks, and makes his way back to Brooklyn, where by all intents, if you've seen, or intents and purposes, if you've seen the different interviews with D'Angelo Russell so far, seems happy to be back, saying all the right things, seems like, just in terms of giving the interviews and having a positive outlook on things, D'Angelo Russell fits the bill there, had nothing but nice things to say about Brooklyn, was able to secure his jersey number back from Zaire Williams for an undisclosed amount of money. So never know. Sometimes you don't know how much money is changing hands for guys to get their uniform numbers back. But D'Angelo Russell, was able to get his number 1 back from Zaire, who's still out with injury, and comes in and does not start this game. Kind of expected that he would maybe start just because, his NBA tenure, the time that he'd been with the Nets before. Not surprising that he didn't, though I did think that, out of the gate, I was like, yeah, there's some chance he's going to come in and start this game. Ultimately, he ends up being the first guy off the bench when he makes, is that right? Let me just double check this. Yeah. So he ends up coming in to the game on the second shift, right? Jalen Wilson's the first guy. So D'Angelo Russell checks in with when Ben Simmons and Nick Claxton check out at around the 7-minute mark. So the 7.5 minute mark in the first game against the Raptors, and basically starts his second tenure with the Brooklyn Nets by kind of just going off. He really couldn't miss. He looked like prime. I mean, if there's a world where there's prime D'Lo out there, that's kind of what it looked like early. He racked up double-digit points very, very quickly. Really didn't look like he could miss. Looked extremely comfortable out there. Overall, you're thinking to yourself, "Oh man, like is this the Nets fans' worst fears? Is D'Angelo Russell going to come in here, play like this old all-star D'Lo? He's going to make every shot. He's going to sort of be high volume. Maybe it's not going to be the best analytical shots, right? He took a lot of mid-rangers when he was with the Nets before, those pull-ups. But here he's shooting threes. He's getting to the line. He's finishing at the rim. It looks like the court vision's all over the place. And you're thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, is this like what the Nets did to Sean Marks, just get Dennis Schroeder out of town because he's, essentially too good for a tanking team, only to go back and bring in D'Angelo Russell, who is not like Dennis Schroeder, but is a capable NBA player, right? Like, I don't think anyone would say, I said this in the last podcast, everyone gets wrapped up sometimes in value relative to contracts, right? Like, you're only as good as the money you make, right? And so if you make a certain amount of money in terms of your overall contract and how much you count against the salary cap for a team, and you underperform that number of money, then you look sort of like a failure. And if you outperform in a player who could be worse than the player I just mentioned before, plays significantly better than, let's say, a min contract, now all of a sudden that looks like the best deal. And sometimes our frame of reference can get clouded a little bit, and it ends up you kind of have a hard time figuring out where the middle meets, right? And so with D'Angelo Russell, I think that's very much the case. Like, clearly not a negative NBA player by any means, but when you sign a huge contract and then now he's getting paid $18 million a year, you get framed based around that number of money. And so he comes in here and looks really, really good just to start, right? Just the kind of guy the Nets need, especially with Cam Thomas out. They lack a lot of on-ball creation. They lack a lot of guys who can just get their own shots. Sometimes they just lack guys who are willing to take their own shots, try to beat a guy off the dribble. They really don't have that many guys on the roster right now that even fit that kind of profile, that just want to get the ball. They want to run pick and roll. They want to come off screens. They want to be pull up for maybe some heat check kind of shots. They just, except for Cam Thomas, there's really not a lot of guys. Is there anybody? I mean, is there anybody on the roster that fits that bill? I can't really think of anybody, right? So even from that standpoint, fitting an archetype, which you do kind of need in the NBA, to have a player that just wants the ball, that wants to take shots, even if the shots are minus EV or, negative expected value, then you still kind of need that on a possession to possession basis, just because that's just kind of how the game works. You can't always just run system basketball every single time up the court. Sometimes you need guys who have it in their heads that, hey, a shot from me is going to be better than a shot from anybody else. That can go overboard at times, but in terms of just an overall sort of aesthetic, I do think the NBA requires that kind of team, that kind of guy, and the best teams all have that kind of guy. Not to say that D'Lo is that kind of guy, but he has it in his head to some degree that he is like that. And it's evidenced by, he comes in, he plays 26 minutes in his first game, and he takes the second most shots on the team. Keon Johnson leads the team with 18 shots. D'Angelo Russell ultimately goes for 9 for 13 from the field, so pretty efficient. 2 for 6 from 3. One of those was questionable, so just because it looked like a sort of a hero shot. But overall, 22 points and 8 assists in 26 minutes, finishes at +2, where basically everyone else on the team except for Tyrese Martin was a minus, right? So they end up winning the D'Angelo Russell minutes. He looks really, really good out there. And I think Nets fans, especially if you are pro tanking here, you sit there for a few seconds and think to yourself, oh man, what did Sean Marks do? Did he do this again? Are they going to put themselves over the top in terms of talent? All right, I want to talk a little bit more about this game, what to expect of the Nets going forward. We'll get into that all here in just one moment. Before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Game Time. Look, you're going to a live event. Maybe it's the game, it's a concert, it's the theater, it's a comedy show. Just whatever it is, you want to make sure you're getting the energy. You want to make sure you're getting the excitement. You want to make sure you're getting the best tickets available. Game Time makes it even easier to get your tickets to the favorite events and the new feature, Game Time Picks. The feature is going to filter out the fluff, show you only incredible deals on great seats. You're not going to waste time searching through thousands of tickets out there for the things that you want. If you go over to Game Time right now, a bunch of great Nets deals. They got Sixers going at the Nets here on Saturday, January 4th. Now it starts at $52. You're thinking to yourself, $52? That's Brooklyn basketball lunchbox night there at Barclays. I think it's a little cheaper there over at Pacers and Nets on the 6th. That's starting at $12. Pistons and Nets starting at $8. You want to take in a basketball game? $8 starting over at Game Time. You're not going to beat these prices. You're not, and it's just make it so easy. You're going to see exactly what you're going to see when you sit down as well. You're going to take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, as for the rest of the game, like I said, the Raptors did pull away late in this one, outscored the Nets 36-22 in the fourth quarter. It was essentially the Nets couldn't hit anything, couldn't get much of anything going on offense at all. The scoring completely dried up. Like I said, 22 total points in the fourth quarter, and really couldn't do anything to stop anybody on the Raptors. Raptors were getting to the rim a ton. They were scoring in the paint. They were beating them out in transition. It just really kind of like, look, the Raptors, who are not a good team in their own right, 8-26. Excuse me. Now, after this game, drop 130 points on you. That's not an amazing look. The Raptors ended up shooting 50% from three. Grady Dick looked really good. Not just hitting threes either. He was able to get to the rim at times. The Nets had all kinds of problems with Scotty Barnes, who went 14 of 18 from the field, including 3 for 4 from beyond the arc. He ends up with 33 points. Like, between those two guys, the Nets just had sort of no answer. Ultra efficient. I mean, especially Barnes. Like, they were ultra efficient and just couldn't, between Barnes's size, length, I guess I would call it athleticism, but just his overall presence, being able to get to the rim, Nets had just absolutely no answers. And for a while, it looks okay, and it looks like they're going to be able to stick into the game, but the Nets just weren't able to really pile anything together. And some of that's the nature of just the overall offense. Look, the Nets, the 22 points, they do score 113 points, but this offense is just still going to have all kinds of problems. Like the starting lineup of Simmons, Keon Johnson, Claxton, Cam Johnson, and Noah Clowney. It's just not really built basketball-wise to maximize sort of like what modern basketball has become. Now, probably some of that's by design. The team doesn't want to be all that good, but this is just a starting five that's just not going to – it's just going to really have trouble keeping its head above water over long stretches. You get 25 minutes out of Simmons. You get these guys all pushing around 30 minutes. They're going to start probably smoothing out some of these minutes as things go forward, just not wanting to just go completely nuts with any one of these guys, especially if they're thinking about trading Cam Johnson. We'll see what happens with Simmons. I'm sure Keon Johnson is probably going to see through the season here. So between not really pushing max minutes, the guys they have coming in off the bench, like Jalen Wilson, fine player, good, not taking a knock there. Tyrese Martin, your overall out of talent, just deficiency, plus, to kind of to reiterate sort of what I said before with D'Angelo Russell, is that like when you also just don't have tons of on-ball scoring, it's going to be tough, right? Like, it's just going to be tough to maintain high scoring levels for long stretches of time, just because the team's just not really built that way. They end up shooting 30% from three. Keon Johnson's still jacking a lot of shots. He only goes 3 for 12 from beyond the arc, so he takes the most shots, but it was pretty inefficient overall. And if that's going to be the case, the numbers just are going to bear out the way they are. They still have long offensive stretches where things look very, very difficult to just kind of get anything going. They would get late into the shot clock on a lot of these trips down the court, mostly because it's trying to hunt out the right shots ends up becoming very difficult with the way that the team is structured, right? When Simmons, watch off. There's one offensive possession that really stood out to me. It was in the fourth quarter. It's the Simmons and Claxton are paired on the court together. Simmons is standing at the in corner three. He's inching his way toward the dunker spot. He really has nothing to do in this case. He doesn't have the ball. I think the ball was in Keon Johnson's hands at that point. Like, he doesn't have the ball. And what's he going to do? Like, he can't back cut anybody because everyone's already helping off of him because they know he's not going to shoot any threes. Then you get Claxton, who's sitting right around the elbow, which is fine if you're going to run screens and DHOs off of that to get him sort of running to the basket or setting up. But they also know that you can help off that because you don't have to guard Simmons at all. So you can't back up. You can't have Simmons break out and hit a corner three to get any kind of spacing. They get the ball to the elbow to Claxton, and it's kind of just nothing happens. Right now, it's like, well, what's Claxton going to do? His guy doesn't need to defend him at all. They can all sag off of him, and they all can help. And if you can sort of just face guard anyone who is around the 3-point line, like Cam Johnson or even Noah Clowney, who's going to end up taking a three. But overall, like, you're not scared of anything that's going to happen. It's not a complaint, really. It's more to just say that if this is going to be the personnel that the Nets are trotting out there on a night-to-night basis, and they're incentivized to play these guys together, then I think these are going to kind of be the expectations of what happens going forward, right? Like, there's just very, very few ways for this to work out. Actually, sorry, D'Angelo Russell even was on the court at that point. It was Tyrese Martin, D'Angelo Russell, Ben Simmons, Nick Claxton, and who's the fifth person? That doesn't matter. I said Keon Johnson. But overall, you get my point, is that you just are going to be – other teams are not going to have a hard time just sort of discerning how to defend this kind of unit, right? Like, you just don't need to guard Simmons if he's basically not – going to get a head steam down. You don't need to guard him at all if he's not on the ball. But like, if Ben Simmons isn't on the ball, you don't need to guard him at all. If Claxton's not in the paint, you really don't need to guard him at all. And all of a sudden, that's 2 out of the 5 guys, 40% of the players that are on your team that you just don't really need to guard unless they're in very, very specific parts of the floor. And that just becomes a pretty easy math problem to solve, like a pretty easy defensive problem to figure out for teams going forward. Now, D'Angelo Russell helps with the spacing a little bit for sure. So I think like that will counterbalances some of that. Having Cam Thomas back will help with some of that because you really have to guard him pretty closely anywhere on the court because he can be able to get his shot. So some of this kind of will solve itself. I do think pairing D'Angelo Russell and Cam Thomas in the backcourt will have major defensive deficiencies. So you'll probably end up just evening out the ledger on that side of the ball when it's all said and done, like whatever they're able to provide on the offense, a lot of it they're going to end up giving back defensively just because neither one is a great point of attack defender. Neither one's just sort of a great system defender. And that just ends up making it pretty easy for the opponent on their own offensive chances down the court. So even if you are getting good shots, and I think you will get if you pair those guys together, you will get a bunch of good shots. Like I think those guys are two pretty dynamic offensive players. They're going to be able to get good looks. I think you'll end up seeing some stretches where those guys maybe even play off each other a little bit and things look really, really good. You will, like I said, give a lot of it back defensively. You know, they just unloaded one of their better defenders in Dorian Finney-Smith. They're still without Zaire Williams. Like they still aren't really, they're not really high level defensively set up right now at all. And so I just don't think that some of that's really going to ever be the problem. But if you just watch these stretches where Simmons and Claxton are on the court kind of around anybody else, it's just like a pretty easy defensive ask for other teams. You just aren't required to do all that much. And I think for the Nets, like where they are, that's just kind of fine. Like what does it really matter, right? Do we want to get it all to have these super high expected value trips down the court every time? I don't really think so. I think the goal is to play hard, to try to get, you know, showcases from any of the guys who you think you might still be able to trade, like Cam Johnson. I don't think Simmons really has any trade value at this point. You know, I don't know what the plan is for flipping D'Angelo Russell down the road. I mean, that could be on the table. I'll talk about that here in the final segment a little bit. But overall, you know, the offensive stagnation that we're going to see from this team is just going to be a repeating thing. I think that those 22 points in the fourth quarter, look, they scored 33 in the first. I'm not saying that. My point is it's not they don't have it in them. They for sure do. I just think that there's going to be, maybe for longer than some other teams, there's going to be stretches of games where being on the struggle bus on the offensive end is going to be expected, right? I just think when you look at this player personnel all put together, the guys that they're incentivized to play larger minutes, it just doesn't totally fit. Even if you're going to get, you know, spike games from a guy like D'Lo who scores 22 in just 26 minutes, right? After that, you know, where are the shots really going to come from? And even when you know where the shots are going to come from, are they going to be shots that you really end up wanting to take, right? And I think those are some of the things that we saw in this Raptors game with just overall when it came to their offensive looks. Just these aren't usually the shots that you want to get in modern basketball. But, you know, look, there's no complaining about this. It's just kind of saying it for what it is. All right. I want to talk a little bit more about this, what to expect here from the team going forward over the next couple of weeks and months as they get ready to play the Bucks on Thursday night. We'll get into that here in just one moment. Before we get that, tell you what, our friends over at FanDuel, NFL playoffs are almost here. Not too late to get on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Look, FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. Going into this week with the NFL, it's crazy too. You got to really, really pay it. This is a good week to take advantage of some of this stuff because this is a week where you're going to get a bunch of starters sitting. You get with just teams that are either out of it or just like wanting to rest going to the playoffs. You got a bunch of contract incentive stuff in there for players trying to hit milestones. You got the incentives are all over the place to the NFL. This is a great time to get over on FanDuel. Start looking at some of those player props. Start looking at some of those game lines. Get that $250 in bonus bets by winning that first $5 real money bet. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's close things out here talking about sort of what to expect from the rest of the season. So they lose this game, and we've kind of I think we're starting to see the writing on the wall a little bit about sort of where this team is going to end up landing in the overall talent landscape. Now, did they do themselves the disservice by winning too many games early? Still a lot of games left, a lot of ways for the season to shake out. Different teams have different incentives. I do think you're going to see some of these teams not totally head for the basement right in the short term, just because just want to pay some service to fans. hands. They're getting some of their guys healthier. We'll see. Some of these teams have just been bad for so long. It's like hard to imagine they continue on these paths of just losing every game, like the Jazz, like the Hornets. I mean, the Raptors, not really, but maybe they're headed toward that ultimate tank situation. Blazers have seemed like they've been bad forever. So there are different teams with different incentives here. I think you're going to see, some of those teams kind of just still continue to give it a solid effort here as the season goes on. Wizards, I think we know they're going to be sellers. They're pretty bad. I think the Nets will probably struggle to get all the way to the bottom of the standings, such as it is. But I don't think it's like this lost cause where the Nets just did themselves so dirty early in the year with a few meaningless wins. And now here we are at 12-21. I don't think that's going to be the case. Excuse me. I do wonder sort of what the future for D'Angelo Russell on the team holds. Like, it doesn't seem like he'd have much just flip it trade value. Obviously he got traded in a package for a bunch of second round picks and quasi journeyman 3-and-D wing and Dorian Finney-Smith. So it's not like he went out the door with so much value. I kind of do wonder though, if there's teams, I was thinking about this while watching the game last night like the Lakers didn't have incentive to kind of ship him off to certain teams because they kind of needed a guy back. But I kind of wonder if there's other teams out there, not many of them, but if there's a few teams out there that could probably use D'Angelo Russell's skill set with the understanding that they wouldn't want to unload crazy talent or crazy picks to get him, right? And they would be sending out guys that the Lakers wouldn't have been necessarily wanting to bring back in, if you follow what I'm saying, right? So that the Lakers wouldn't have entertained certain trade packages for D'Angelo Russell because it would have involved maybe like sort of dead money or like picks of their own or something like that was going to come back. And the Lakers need guys right now who can step in and actually play, like Dorian Finney-Smith. So if you look at a team like, let's say, the Magic, where the Magic are 2015, their Paolo and Franz have been injured forever. Paolo should be on his way back here. Franz is out here for a bit. The team has all kinds of problems in the backcourt scoring. They could probably use somebody on the team that I just, like I mentioned before, that just takes some shots at times. They ended up losing last night to Detroit 105-96 because they just can't score. Like these guys, this team just can't really score at all. Jalen Suggs is taking the most shots on the team. Jalen Suggs is a really good player, but if he's going to be your highest shot taker, especially out of the guard position, that's going to be a problem. They do have two really good, they have multiple good guard defenders in Suggs, in KCP, that can kind of mask maybe D'Lo's inefficiencies. Like, I wonder if this would be a team that could say to themselves, look, are we going to trade a first round pick for him? No, of course not. But could we trade one of our young players who's struggling to get time and maybe like a late second or something like that to bring D'Angelo Russell back in, and we can match some money with cobble together some money like Gary Harris or, I don't know, just guys like this, or Mo Wagner. He might be Mo Wagner out for the season. So there's just guys that I think they have probably a couple of ways that they could make it happen. I don't think it's overall very likely to happen. My main point is that I do think that Mo Wagner's $11 million for next year. So I do think that there's just teams that could look at D'Angelo Russell and say, oh, that guy could help us for a final run here to get into the playoffs if we just didn't have to give up too much to get him. But the things that we would have given up would not have been things the Lakers would have wanted. So I hope that tracks what I'm saying here about why I don't think it's completely off the table that D'Angelo Russell gets traded to one of these other teams. Now, the Magic stood out to me, as one of these teams. There weren't a ton of other options. One thing the team I was thinking was like OKC, right? Like, D'Angelo Russell coming off the bench, to just be a bench scorer, backup point guard to SGA for just down the stretch to kind of maintain their seeding. I know people are going to be like, oh, they don't need him. Well, I get it. They don't need him. But they're 27-5. I'm just saying that there are situations that you could look at it and say, if he didn't need to be a main cog in the offense, if he just didn't have to be a guy that had to do if he had to do a bunch of different stuff, on a game-to-game basis, but he could still do the things that he does well without having to worry too much about it just being some massive negative. I kind of do think there might be some value out there. Not value. Is that the right word? I do think there could be a market for a guy like him if they could just cobble together the rest of the salaries. The money is a little weird. That $18 million range is a tough one to match. You usually need 2 players to be able to do it for most teams where they live with contracts. So it's not a 100% clean fit. It's not likely to happen at this point. But overall, I do think there's a world where you could look at some of these teams and be like, yeah, they can make a case. Like I said, they can make a case to like him be the 7th man on the Thunder for the rest of the season. I don't know. It's not the craziest thing in the world. The Magic, like I said, could definitely use a guy like him. You know, the Miami Heat, Terry Rozier's hurt now. Jimmy Butler's situation's all weird. Like, could they use another guy off the bench to score? Look, am I grasping at straws a little bit? Yeah, kind of. But also, it's mostly to say that sometimes these players get written off because the situation that they were coming out of would never have been a situation that the other team would entertain certain players to get brought back for. But that's just not the case for the Nets. The Nets are should be open for business and kind of any player that was going to end up coming back. So I don't want to just completely write off the fact that he might not be flipped at some point for something going to the trade deadline. Just a note on that, you can't aggregate his salary with anyone else's. So it's not like they can aggregate just because of the timing of the trade. They can't aggregate his salary and then flip it for like a much higher player's dead money to like sit on their cap for next year because they're gonna have so much cap space. Like, that is one thing that can't be done right now because the timeline on it having just been traded, you can't re-aggregate. He can be traded just for himself. Like, he can be the only guy in a trade, but he can't get that money aggregated going out the door to go up. So it had to be 2 smaller. It had to be players of the same contract value as his now coming back in, or they can aggregate salaries coming back in for D'Angelo Russell. So just something to keep an eye on. We'll see how it goes. Maybe we get out of this Raptors game and say, hey, don't worry, it'll be like a nice story for D'Angelo Russell to sit out to go through the rest of the season on the Nets. But just kind of wanted to pay lip service a little bit to the idea that he might not be on the team here forever, because I don't think it's a totally foregone conclusion that he's untradeable. I'm not sure that's really the case. Okay, gonna get out of here. Bucks game tonight against Giannis and company, who should be fully healthy. Nets obviously pretty big underdogs for this game. Let me get this line. Yeah, Nets plus 14 going into Milwaukee. So that's more like it with where you want to see some of these lines end up for the Nets. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to the podcast. Make sure you subscribe to YouTube as well. Let's get to 8,000 subscribers over on YouTube. Make sure you do that. And as always, we get to this part of the podcast. Adam's always the one that finds those quotes from the great American poets. Adam Armbrecht. Hope he's feeling better. Hopefully he's going to be back in studio tomorrow. He's one of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.